All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank, actually, just our TAMLUD TORAH anonymous sponsorship, TAMLUD TORAH sponsorship with Hakaras Hatov, to Hashem for all of the blessings He has bestowed upon us, and for refuah Shleima for Devorah Leah bas Chaya Rivka. May we all be zoche and Hashem to witness the imminent coming of mashiach. B'mehera b'yameinu. Amen. And also with that, let us. Why is this not working? Microphone. Oh, all right. I don't know why. All right, I'm gonna. Good if I start. Okay, so I'll say let's begin. So we are picking up Metzia Hashem. Today's daf is Tzaddikim 95, and we are picking up Metzia Hashem on 95a, 4 lines down from the top. So the Gemara says as follows: Geneva va'aveda b'shoel minala. So I will say. So remember again. Yeah, I sent it out last night. You gotta check your WhatsApp. Gotta do your homework. However, let's go. The share doesn't end. Share doesn't end when share ends. This is an ongoing, ever-evolving process. All right. So Geneva v'aveda b'shoel minala. Otherwise, if we don't start on Sunday at the actual daf point, it's already it's very, very dim hopes for the rest of the week. So Gemara says, "So Geneva va'aveda b'shoel minala." So from where do we know that there is a liability for Geneva va'aveda by a shoel, by a borrower? So the Gemara says, "V'chi tema nelef mishvura umesa." So maybe you'll say, "We'll learn out from shvura umesa." Ultimately, again, from an animal, now both say shvura means literally again broken. Mesa means the animal died. So the Gemara says, "Mala shvura umesa delo efshar lemitrach ve'isuye." Here's the problem. The problem with shvura umesa both says that those are irreversible conditions. In other words, as opposed to Geneva va'aveda, where technically speaking, the animal could be restored, the animal could be returned. When it comes to shvura umesa, that is not the case. So the Gemara says, ultimately there is no ability to go ahead and literally restore it. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so remember again, what we saw already in yesterday's daf is this idea that halacha l'maisa, the psukim of Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sachar, and Shoel. And by the way, the psukim are brought down in that particular order. What's interesting is they're grouped together, but fascinatingly enough, there are different halachas that are stated for each of these particular items. Okay, Chevron, Zoom, you still hear me all right?
Yeah, we're going.
Okay. Microphone?
I got it.
I'm just here to give the share. Everything else was outsourced. So, as well, so the Gemara says, Jeremy, thank you. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, therefore, even though these psukim are grouped together, interestingly enough, no one pasuk contains all of the information. Rather, instead, what ends up, thank you, perfect. Right. Rather, instead, what ends up happening is that halacha l'maisa, because they are juxtaposed, we end up learning many different concepts from each different grouping. So the Gemara says, so for example, over here in this particular section, we're trying to figure out how do we know that there's liability for Geneva va'aveda, for ultimately, again, an object that is stolen or broken by a shoel. So the Gemara says, Ella kiha. So rather we go ahead and we learn out from the following idea, kiha desanya. V'nishpar omes. The pasuk says, if the animal is broken or dies. Now again, the pasuk over here is talking about the shoel. V'chi yishal adam ish, v'chi yishal ishme imre'eu, v'nishpar omes, balov ein imo, shalem mishalem. So here the Torah says as follows, Einli ella shvura umesa. I only know that a shoel is liable if the animal breaks or dies. Geneva va'aveda minayin. How do I know if the animal is stolen or the animal is lost? How do I know that there's liability? Amrit kavachomer. So I say there's a kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? Uma shomer sachar shepatim mishvur umesachai begneva va'aveda. So if shomer sachar, a paid custodian who is pater from shvura and mesa, is chayiv in geneva va'aveda, shoel shechai b'shvura mesa, shoel who is liable for shvura mesa, because again, remember that's written explicitly in the pasuk. Eino din shechai b'gneva va'aveda, certainly going to be chayiv for geneva va'aveda. V'zeru kavachomer she'ena lov tshuva, and this is a kavachomer for which there is no refutation. In other words, this is a solid and ironclad kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says, "My ina love tshuva." Now, both say when the Gemara says that there is no question on this kal v'chomer, that has to mean because you would have thought to raise a particular question. What question would you have thought to raise? V'chi tema ikala mifrach. Perhaps you would say we could ask the following shayla. Mala shomer sachar shekim misham tashlumei kefal b'toyin tanas listim. So we'll say shomer sachar is different. Why is the shomer sachar different? We actually saw this back in our Bava Kama days. That the halacha is as follows: if a shomer sachar, right, a paid custodian, makes a claim that the object was stolen from him, and then it turns out that or stolen from him with armed robbers, which would even be like an ones, a tainus ones. So then it turns out that he himself stole it. Halacha l'maisa, again, he has to pay kefal. So the Gemara says that maybe that shows that shomer sachar is even more chomer than shoel, and that would be a reason why the kal v'chomer can't work. Afilu hachi karna the shoel adifa. Now we'll say it's interesting. We've seen this concept before. The obligation to pay keren, to have to pay principal, is in all cases is more chomer than the possibility of having to pay kefel in select cases. The other possibility is kasavar listim mezuyin gazlanu. The other possibility is he holds that listim mezuyin is not considered to be ones, but rather is considered to be gazlan. Okay, so ashkechal nechiv. So I'll say, so now we've established. Okay, so let's go through. We're going to make a couple of different points over the course of today's daf. So the first thing we've just established, Abosai, is that a shoel is chayiv for geneva va'aveda. Because remember again, when talking about even, Abosai, see, here's what's interesting. We've operated through these masechtas already knowing the level of liability that a shoel has. Right? Remember again, your level of liability is directly related to your rights of usage. The more usage you have, the more liability you have. Therefore, a shoel, a borrower, essentially has complete usage. Because he has complete usage, therefore, halacha l'maaseh, he has complete liability. Complete liability. The only time a shoel doesn't have liability is when ba'al of imo, when the owner is with him, which we've redefined also. Owner with him means what? Means what? The owner is employed by the shoel, right? That's really what's happening over. The owner works for the shoel. Now, when, how long, that's going to be in Hashem, our upcoming sugya. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So now what we're doing is we're kind of taking all those things that we know and we're trying to figure out how do we know them? How do we know them? So now here's what's important to understand. When it comes to the shoel himself, the pasuk only discusses his liability by nishbar or mace. The animal breaks, the animal breaks a limb, or the animal dies. That's when the Torah tells me that the shoel is liable. Now the Gemara is trying to say, okay, how do I know in a case of geneva and aveda? If the animal's stolen, the animal's lost, how do I know that a shoel, that a borrower is chayiv? So I'll say the answer to that is kal v'chomer from shomer sachar. Okay, check. That's our first piece, our first nugget of Talmudic information for today. Next, the Gemara says, ashkechal nechiv, liftar minalan. So I'll say, so now the next question is, how do I know? So now I know that there's liability, that a shoel has liability for geneva va'aveda. How do I know that in a case of ba'al of imo, right? In a case where, let's say, just to frame this in the right way, right? I borrow an animal from Ruvain. So now we've established that if that animal is stolen or that animal breaks a limb, I, the borrower, am liable. Okay? Now I want to transition to the next case. I borrow an animal from Ruvain, and so here's a simple case, by the way. I rent Ruvain's ox to plow my field, but what do I know about plowing? So I rent Ruvain's ox, and I also hire Ruvain to go ahead and plow the field. So I'll say, so now this is the biblical case of Ba'al of Imo. The owner of the animal is together with the animal in my employ at the time that something happens. How do I know that if at that time when Ruvain is in my employ and again, working with the animal that I borrowed from him, if the animal breaks a limb or is stolen, that I am potter, that I, the renter, I, the shoel, sorry, not the renter, the borrower, I, the borrower, am potter. So maybe we'll say, so why should this be a big deal? Say, just like by Shavura Umesa, if Ba'al of Imo, if the owner is present, and again I will say, I just want to point out, up until we started this sugya, we always thought that what does owner present mean? What does it mean if the owner is present at a shoel is potter? I don't know about you. What did you think? He was just hanging around. Right? He was just with you. Right? It happens to be Ruvain is my friend. So I borrowed his ox, and we happened to be having a l'chaim. Well, not that it's good to do a l'chaim and plowing at the same time. I would imagine. Right? But l'maisa, again, we were just together. Now it turns out that that's not what it means. What it means is Ba'al of Imo means that the owner was working for me, the owner of the animal was working for me at the same time that I was borrowing the animal. So now, both say, it's just, we're going to talk about that more, but now the Gemara says, okay, so I understand that if Ruvain, the owner, is with me, right, so for now, I'm not going to define it anymore, I'm just going to use Baal of Imo. I understand that if Baal of Imo, when the animal breaks a limb, or ultimately again dies, that I'm potter, because that's the pasuk. That's the pasuk. Now I'm trying to figure out, how do I know that if the owner is with me at the time of Nignava Va'avda, if, let's say again, the animal was stolen or was lost, how do I know that I'm potter because of Baal of Imo? To which the Gemara says, well, why don't you just learn Avichitim and Elef Mishvuro Mesa? Just learn out from Shavura Mesa. Same way that if the animal is Shavura Mesa, if the animal breaks or dies, and Baal of Imo, I am potter, I the borrower am potter, so too again, if Nignava o Avda, if it's lost or stolen, and Baal of Imo also be potter. To which Gemara says, no. Mala Shavura Mesa Shekin Ones. Shavura and Mesa are different. Why? Because we will say it's an Ones case. It's an Ones case, extenuating circumstances. To which the Gemara says, again, Alagamar Mishomer Sachar. Rather, what you have to say is, you're not from Shomer Sachar. The Gemara says, that what? That just like Shomer Sachar, if Baal of Imo is going to be potter for Nignava Va'avda, Gneva Va'aveda, so to Shoel, if there's Baal of Imo, will be potter for Gneva Va'aveda. To which the Gemara says, okay, the Shomer Sachar Gufei Minalan. So I'll say, where do you know that a Shomer Sachar is potter for Gneva Va'aveda if Baal of Imo? Where do you get that from? To which the Gemara says, Gamri Chiyuva de Shomer Sachar, Michiyuve de Shoel. This is very interesting logic. We'll learn out the liability of Shomer Sachar from the liability of Shoel. Ma lahalan bebailin pater, afkam bebailin pater. As Rabbi said, remember, the whole chap is we learn out from Shoel. Remember, the concept of the Ptur of Baal of Imo is written by Shoel. But yet we learn that the Ptur to apply to other cases as well, Shomer Sachar. Whether it applies to Shomer Chinam, we're going to see in just a little bit, but it applies to Shomer Sachar. So once I learn out the Ptur, the exemption of Baal of Imo, from Shoel to Shomer Sachar, then I can take all of the cases of Shomer Sachar that would be potter for Baal of Imo and apply them back to Shoel. So just like Shomer Sachar is going to be potter for Gneva Va'aved of Baal of Imo, so too I could apply that back to Shoel, to which the Gemara says, B'mai Gomer. So what are we learning this out from? Or what mechanism are we using to learn this out? The Gemara says, B'mematzinu. And I will say, Mematzinu is like a common denominator. If we're for a common denominator, Ikela Mifrach Kidabrachinon. So you can ask the question we asked before, Shekein Ones, because it's an Ones case, Ela Amakra, V'chi Yish'al Vav Mosif Al Inyon Rishon, V'yelamed Elyon Mitachton. Rather, I will say the pasuk of Sheila, the pasuk by Shoel, uses lashon of V'chi, that vav. So he says that is a vav Mosif Al Inyon Rishon. What that vav of Shoel does is, that vav of Shoel comes to link it ultimately again to Shomer Sachar. V'yilamed inyan rishon, v'yilamed elyon mitachton. We could go ahead and learn the upper parts from the lower parts. In other words, I'm going to learn the Ptur, I'm going to learn the exemption of Baal of Imo, which is written by Shoel. And I'm going to go ahead and learn it out. Right? I'm written by Shoel. I'm going to go ahead and apply that ultimately to Shomer Sachar. V'yilamed elyon mitachton. I'll learn out Shomer Sachar from Shoel. Just like Shoel has a Ptur of Baal of Imo, so too Shomer Sachar has a Ptur of Baal of Imo. And ultimately, again, I'll utilize that to then take anything for which the Ptur of Baal of Imo applies to Shomer Sachar, it'll certainly apply to Shoel as well. Vakati Shoel mi Shomer Sachar lo gamer. But still, you can't learn out Shoel from Shomer Sachar. Why? Di'ika lemifrach. Mala Shomer Sachar shekin pater b'shvura umesa. Shomer Sachar is going to be pater by shvura umesa. Because let's remember again, shvura umesa is considered to be a case of ones. Tamar b'shol shechai b'shvura umesa. Remember again, I will say one of the unique aspects of a shoel is that a shoel is chayv in everything, even ones, even extenuating circumstances. To which the Gemara says, Ella Gneva va'aveda b'shol lechayva minala. So therefore I will say we're back. So how do I know that ultimately again there's liability of Gneva va'aveda by a shoel? The Gomer Mishomer Sachar. We learned that from Mishomer Sachar. Both that was the previous sugya. We just said that before. But yet, Dayo Lavo Minadin Lios Kinidon. I will say, whenever you learn something out, right? Whenever you learn something out from a Kavachomer, there's a concept of Dayo. What does Dayo mean? Dayo means that the drasha that you're making can be no stronger than the source from which you are deriving it. In that case, ma geneva va'aveda de shomer sachar by bailim pater. Shabbos said, just like geneva va'aveda by shomer sachar, right? By bailim, when it's baal of imo is going to be pater. Af geneva va'aveda de shol nami bailim pater. So to Yanabose, we'll learn it out that the Torah of baal of imo applies by geneva va'aveda, even by a shoal as well. To which we'll say first wide line. To which the Gemara says, you're fine. Hanicha leman de islay dayo. That works fine if you hold of dayo. Remember, we've seen this many times throughout our journeys in Shabbos. Whether or not you use this concept of dayo is in and of itself a machlokes tanoim. Eleman de leslay dayo ma'ikon lemimar. But the opinion that says that you don't have to subscribe to the concept of dayo, what is there to say? Ela amakra v'chi yishal vav mosif al inyon rishon v'elamet elyon mitachton v'tachton me'elyon. So we'll say here it is. Here it is. Bottom line is it's all about that vav. It's all about that vav. See the concept. Remember, in the Torah, the sections of the shomer are written like this: shomer chinam 1, shomer sachar 2, shoel 3. Shoel has, the section of Shoel is introduced with this vav. V'chi yish al ishme imre ehu. If a person will borrow, it's that vav. What does that vav do? That vav connects Shoel to the section before it, to Shomer Sachar. But what it does is it connects both of them. It connects Shoel to Shomer Sachar and Shomer Sachar to Shoel. If we bring this all together, that connection yields two realities. Number one, it will make Shoel chayiv in Geneva Va'aveda, right? Because remember again, Geneva Va'aveda is not written by Shoel. It's only written by Shomer Sachar. So the Vav connects the two, and the Vav will say, just like Shomer Sachar is going to be chayiv for Geneva Va'aveda, so too Shoel be chayiv for Geneva Va'aveda. And what it also does is, it allows the concept of Baal of Imo, the P'tur, the exemption of Baal of Imo, which applies by Shoel to what? To be applied to Shomer Sachar. But and by extension, it'll teach us that wherever it applies in Shomer Sachar, will ultimately be applied in Shoel as well. So just like the P'tur of Geneva Va'aveda, I should say the P'tur of Baal of Imo applies to Geneva Va'aveda by Shomer Sachar, so too it will apply ultimately again by Shoel as well. So I'll say beautiful. All about that Vav. All about that Vav, right? That Vav essentially connects the two sections and allows for drashas to go both ways. Baal of Imo from Shoel to Shomer Sachar, Geneva Va'aveda ultimately again from Shomer Sachar to Shoel, and whatever the P'tur of, whenever there's going to be a P'tur of Baal of Imo by Shomer Sachar, all of those cases will apply to Shoel as well. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Incredible. Itmar. So we'll say this is a very interesting discussion here. So we'll say, so the first part of today's daf was really what we'll just call, it's drashas, right? It's drashas. In other words, the information that the Gemara arrived at, we already knew beforehand. We knew it already. We just didn't know how we know it. So now we know it. Now I know how I know it. Next, listen to this case. Itmar, Pshir B'Bailim. Wow. I both say, watch this. So now, here's what we've established. There's something called Baal of Imo. And what is Baal of Imo? That Allah Chamaisa, if I borrow something, and by the way, now we see it's not just borrowing, it's true by a Shomer Sachar also, right? I'm borrowing an object, or I'm watching an object, and as I'm doing that, the owner is in my employ. He works for me. The owner of the object I'm watching or borrowing is working for me. So what's the halacha? If something happens to the animal, it breaks, it dies, it's stolen, it's lost, whatever it is, I am potter. Baal of Imo, I am potter. We'll say, why is that? Because the Ribono Shel Olam says so. That's it. It's a pasuk. It's a drasha. Right? This svaras, but we'll leave the svaras now. But that's Gzeres HaKosov. So here's the interesting shaila. Watch this case. I go ahead and I borrow, because let's just keep it with Shaul, because that's what the puzzle is. I borrow an ox from Ruvain. Okay? And now I hired Ruvain along with the ox because Ruvain's going to plow with the ox for me. Okay? So now everything is in place. I borrowed the ox, Baal of Imo. We'll say now what happens? At night, I leave the barn door open and the ox runs away. So I will say that is an act of pshia. That's negligence. But it's Baal of Imo. So does the exemption of Baal of Imo work even in a case of pshia? Isn't that a great question? Yeah? Yeah. Right? So I'm sorry? Correct. This is where, because remember, a Baal can't be a Poshea because he's the Baal. He's the Baal. In other words, if I'm negligent with my own stuff, that's my own problem, not answerable to anyone. Correct. It's where I want to be clear, I the borrower, I'm the Poshea. I left the barn door open, the animal escaped, but I will say, so here's what's interesting. On one hand, Pshia. Now again, whenever we hear, right, if we do word association, I say Pshia, you say Chai. Excellent, right? I was a little bit worried about that. I didn't know what was going to happen there. Right? Whenever you throw out word associations to large groups of people, you never know what's going to be, right? So I'll say, again, generally, Pshia is always Chayiv. See, the Shaila over here is now, this is a Pshia B'Bailim. So what is the halachas? Listen to this. So pligi barav achav ravina machlokes chad amar chayiv v'chad amar pater. Interesting. So both say machlokes. One says no. The p'tur of baal of imo does not apply to pshia. If you're a poshea, you're chayiv. Other opinion says no. The p'tur of baal of imo absolutely applies to pshia. So here we go. Let's go through this. Man damar chayiv. Very exciting. Man damar chayiv. The one who says that you're chayiv kasavar. Listen to this. Mikra nidrash lefanov. Supposed to listen to this. He holds, because remember again, everything in this sugi goes back to the structure. In the Torah, should really have like a printout of the psukim, just easier to see it. But again, it's actually easy to follow. Three sections. Shomechinam, Shomesachar, Shoal, in that order. Now remember again, just to be clear, where is the p'tur of Baal of Imo written? Where is it written? By Shoal. So watch this. So the one who says that you're chayiv for Baal of Imo B'Bailim, so Kasavar Mikra Nidra Shlafanav V'lo Lifnei Fanav. He holds, that I will say this is like an exegetical dispute. He holds that when you darshim psukim, what you're allowed to do is you could extend a drasha to the section before, but not the two sections before. Therefore, watch this. Hilchach, in Baal of Ima Shomrechinam Lo Ksiv. Suppose now watch this. So therefore, if that's the case, then the concept of Baal of Imo could be applied to Shoel, because that's where it's written, and could also be applied where? To Shomer Sachar, because that's the section before, but is not applied to Shomechinam. Not applied to Shomechinam. Upshia nami b'Shomer Sachar u'b'Shoel lo ksiv. Now, Boston, here's what's interesting. This is incredible. This is so fascinating. Where is the concept of liability for Pshia mentioned? Where is it mentioned? In the section of Shomer Chinam. So watch this. So the opinion that says, the opinion that says that you're chayiv for Pshia, even if it's Baal of Imo, will say like this. So Baal of Imo is written in Shoel, right? He darshins, this opinion holds that exegetically you could only go ahead and apply a drasha to the section that it's written in and to the section immediately before, the one that it's immediately juxtaposed to. Therefore, I could take Baal of Imo and I can apply it. Obviously, it's by Shaul. I can apply it to Shomer Sachar, but I can't apply it to Shomer China because that's two sections removed. Which means, and we'll see this in just a little bit, the p'tur of Baal of Imo does not apply to Shomer China. Interestingly enough, Pshia is written in the section of Shomer China. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Baal of Imo doesn't apply to Pshia. Wow. Beautiful. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, as much as Baal of Imo will pater you, the renter or the borrower, for all other types of damage, if you are posheh, if you're negligent, you will be chayiv. The Gemara says, therefore, hilcha b'shomer shtachar or b'shol lechiyuv. I'm sorry. In Baal of Imo shomer chinam lo ksiv u'pshinai b'shomer sachar u'b'shol lo ksiv hilchach b'shomer sachar u'b'shol lechiyuv asya. Bekal v'chomer mishomer chinam. Aval bebailim liftar af b'shomer sachar u'b'shoel lo. My time ki ksiv and Baal of Imo lo yishalim ashoel va'ashomer sachar ahana chiyuvi dichsiv b'hu behedja hu demichtiv. Shabbos said because halacha l'ma'isa the p'tur of Baal of Imo will only apply to the specific liabilities mentioned both by Shoel and Shomer Sachar, but by liabilities not written by Shomer Sachar. And by Shoel, the p'tur of Baal of Imo doesn't apply, since Pshia is only written by Shomer Chinam and not by the other two, and the p'tur of Baal of Imo doesn't apply to Shomer Chinam. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, the p'tur, the exemption of Baal of Imo, does not apply by Pshia. Incredible. That's first opinion. Second opinion, Man Damar Pater. So also the one who says that the Torah of Baal of Imo applies even to Pshia, he'll say this, Kasavar, get ready for this, Mikra Nedrash Lafanov, V'lifnei Fanov. No. But say, that's I said, this is really an exegetical machlokas. When you have a concept in the Torah, now how far back, how many sections back can you apply? Now, obviously I want to point out the concept of taking a concept and applying it to previous adjacent juxtaposed sections obviously only applies when the sections themselves have a common theme that runs through them. So remember again, I'm about to say, in these sections, there obviously is a common theme, because Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sacher, Shoel, these are all different types of relationships that I have with other people's objects. So obviously there's a linkage. So second opinion says that from an exegetical perspective, you can go ahead and take a concept that applies in section C and apply it 2 sections back, to B and to A. So therefore, Rabbi say, what does that mean? Here we go. So we'll say, now watch this. Watch this. If that's the case, then remember again, where is the Torah of Baal of Imo written? Where is it written? Where is it written? Shoel. If you hold it exegetically, you can take a concept in section C and apply it 2 sections back. That means Baal of Imo applies first Shomer Sacher and also Shomer Chinam, which means now that the Torah of Baal of Imo applies to Shomer Chinam. The concept of liability for pshia, for negligence, is in Shomer Chinam, which also tells me that what? The Torah for Baal of Imo also applies by negligence. Incredible. So we'll say, here it is. Here's our machlokas, right? So let's consolidate now. Let's consolidate. Here's what we know. Okay, let's go with what we know first. I know that there's a Torah of Baal of Imo, right? That literally, again, if the owner is with me at the time, again, we'll define the scope of it. The owner is with me at the time that I'm borrowing the animal, at the time that I am the paid custodian for the animal, and something happens to the animal, ultimately I'm pater. And I both say, what does it mean something happens? Let's go through what we know. What could happen? I'd be pater. So now we know what? We know Gneva, Aveda, Shavura, Mesa. Shavura, Mesa I know because it's written in the pasuk. Gneva, Aveda I know how. How? Kavachomer to Shomer Sacher. Beautiful. Okay, that life is good. Now we'll say, what's the problem? Or now the problem. What's the question? I'm borrowing this animal from Ruvain, right? And Ruvain, I'm borrowing the ox to plow, and I'm also hiring Ruvain to manage the animal, to plow with the animal. I leave the barn door open, and now again the animal runs away. That is pshia. That is an act of negligence. But yet Ruvain is in my employ at the time of this negligence. Am I chayiv or am I pater? Do we call this Baal of Imo or not? And I will say, what does it come down to? Hayidarshan psukim. Essentially, again, on an exegetical level, when we have a concept mentioned in section C, how far back can we apply it? Opinion number 1 says only 1 section back. So you can only take Baal of Imo, apply it to Shomer Sacher, can't apply it to Shomer Chinam. Well, the whole concept of pshia is only written by Shomer Chinam, which means that there is no ptur of Baal of Imo by pshia. Okay? Opinion number 2 says, no, you could even exegetically, you could take a principle in section C and apply it even all the way back to section A, which means that the ptur of Baal of Imo applies even by Shomer Chinam. Shomer Chinam is where pshia is written, and therefore, Allah L'maisa, the ptur of Baal of Imo applies even by pshia. Okay, that's our machlokas. Let's analyze a bit. The Gemara says, Tanan. So let's talk about this. So Tanan. Hasholas apara v'shal bala ima. If I borrow a cow from Ruvain, right, and I borrow literally means I borrow Ruvain with him. In other words, that I hire Ruvain together with the cow. Or hasholas apara v'sachar ba'ala ima. Or I borrow the cow and I rent Ruvain. In other words, I'm hiring it. In other words, the Gemara is just pointing out over here is you don't need the same exact arrangement for the animal and for its owner. Shal ba'ala osachran v'achakach shal apara umeisa. Or for that matter, again, I hired Ruvain and afterwards I went ahead and borrowed the cow and then the cow died. So we'll say, what's the point over here? What's the point? The point over here is that halacha l'maisa, at the time the animal died, Ruvain, the owner of the animal, was employed by me. He was working for me. In all these cases, pater. Why am I pater? What do we call this? Baal of Imo. Okay. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, v'ilu shomer chinam lo katani. And I will say, if you notice, by the way, in all of these cases, in all of these variations, there's 2 possibilities: Shoel or Shomer Sacher. Shomer Chinam is never written, which sounds like what the Gemara is saying over here, what the Mishnah is saying over here, is that the tour of Baal Avimo doesn't apply to a Shomer Chinam. Well, the Ta'amech, Shomer Sacher Mikatan. The Gemara says, 1 second, it doesn't say Shomer Sacher either, right? It just says, again, Shoel or Socher. Elatana Milsa Diksiva Amud Beis. Elatama Milsa Diksiva Behedja Katani. Dasim Midrasha Lo Katani. Right? So we'll say, so ultimately, again, the Tana, this Mishnah is only writing cases which are biblically explicit. So we'll say, so the truth is, the only case in the Torah that's biblically explicit of Baal Avimo is Shoel. Nothing else is biblically explicit, therefore it's not giving those examples. Second line from the Torah will say 95b, it's how it came with base. Tashma, Sha'ala v'sha'al Ba'ala imo, Sachra v'sachar Ba'ala imo. So we'll say, now watch this, if you go ahead and you borrowed the animal and you borrowed the owner with it, or you rented the animal and you rented the owner with it, Sha'ala v'sachar Ba'ala imo, Sachra v'sha'al Ba'ala imo. So we'll say, so again, all of these cases is you're renting the animal and you're also getting the owner. So, right? So all these cases both are Baal Avimo. What's the halacha? Afapi shabaylim osim malacha b'makom acher. Even though Rabbi say, listen to this, at the time that the animal dies, the owner is working somewhere else. Rashi says, b'makom acher, last white line of Rashi, shelo b'makom apara, or b'vachatei melachto shel sha'ol shel socher. So we'll say, umeisa pater. Now, again, this statement is going to be subject to dramatic dispute, but let's just take it at face value right now. What the Gemara seems to say is like this. You see, when we think about when we think about Baal of Ima, so if I were to ask you, right, how would you conjure up the case, right? What's the image of Baal of Ima, right? When the animal dies and the owner's with it, what's the case? The case is literally where, again, the animal is plowing, Reuven, the owner, is leading the animal. The Gemara now saying, by the way, it doesn't have to be the case. Baal of Ima just means that literally, the owner of the animal is employed and working for me at the time the animal died, even if he's doing a different malacha. He's doing something different. So in other words, I rented Reuven's ox, I borrowed Reuven's ox, and now again, so the ox is plowing. Reuven, meanwhile, is harvesting my wheat, doing something else. So the Gemara suggests that that's still called Baal Avima. That's still called Baal Avima because halacha l'maisa, he is employed by me, even though it's not the same halacha that the animal is doing. So the Gemara says, Savrua Hamani Rabbi Huda. Who's the opinion? It's Rabbi Huda the Amar Socher Kishomer Sacher Dami. Because Rabbi Huda holds ultimately again that a socher, a renter, is like a shomer sacher. Like a shomer sacher. Look at Rashi, Kishomer sacher dami. First short line. Rashi says, "V'tana socher bebailin pater v'adin shomer sacher aval shomer chinam lo katani." Now I will say once again, the Gemara is highlighting cases of you have a socher of a shomer sacher. Who is it not including? A shomer chinam. So it seems to point in the direction that the concept of Baal of Imo doesn't apply to a shomer chinam. Now I will say, now again, remember, if you say that the p'tur of Baal of Imo doesn't apply to a shomer chinam, then I will say, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? That would also tell you that there's no p'tur of Baal of Imo by pshia. Pshia, okay? So when it says, 1 second, Vaha, hai tana katani milza de asim midrasha, so let's say, so again, this time is bringing up things that we learn out, not explicitly from the pasuk. They're learning out from drashas, and yet still Shomer Chinam is not mentioned. So once again, that would seem to indicate that the p'tur of Baal of Imo doesn't apply to Shomer Chinam, which would then mean that Allah Chalamaisa, the p'tur of Baal of Imo doesn't apply to Pshia. To which the Gemara says, no. Ha mani Rabbi Meir hi da amar socher ki Shomer Chinam dami. This is Rabbi Meir. So what is Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir holds that a socher, a renter, is like a shomer chinam. The Gemara says, "V'tana shomer chinam v'hu adin l'shomer sacher." So we'll say, therefore, again, halacha l'maisa. Rabbi Meir says a socher is like a shomer chinam, and therefore, again, when we say shomer chinam, same thing as a socher. Socher, same thing as a shomer chinam. Ibai saying the other possibility is kidemachlif Rabba Baravu Avatani socher keitzad mishalim. Or the other possibility is Rabbi Baravua said he switched things around and he explained socher keitzad mishalim. How does a renter pay liability wise? So the Rabbi Meir Omer kishomer sacher, Rabbi Huda Omer kishomer chinam. Okay, so we'll say so the Gemara answered up those mishnayos, but bottom line, we'll say how do we paskin here, because this is an incredibly important halacha. So we'll say so let's pause for just a moment because we're right about to get into a new sugya. So we'll say here's what we know. Right, here's what we know. There's one more time. There's a p'tur of Baal Avimo. Right, Baal Avimo means what for our purposes? If I borrow an animal, and by the way, it's not just borrowing; it could be other relationships as well. I borrow the animal, and at the time and the owner is employed by me as well. then the halacha is, if something happens to the animal, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Pater. What does that apply to? I know now everything. It applies to Geneva Aveda, right? That's Kal V'chomer from Shomer Sachar, and applies to Shvura Umesa, that is explicit in the Pasuk. Our question now, does it apply to Pshia? I am negligent. I borrow an animal from Ruvain. Ruvain's working with me, right? I, the renter or the borrower, I am negligent with the animal, but yet Ruvain's in my employ. Am I pater because of Ba'alav Imo or not? So the Gemara seems to make this entire discussion really dependent on how you apply the exegetical principle of juxtaposition, right? Or how, in other words, lefanav or lefnei fanav. 3 sections, Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sachar, Shoel, Ba'alav Imo written by Shoel. How far back can you apply the exemption of Ba'alav Imo? If it's just one time back to Shomer Sachar, then ultimately, again, that means Ba'alav Imo doesn't apply to Shomer Chinam. The concept of Pshia, of negligence, is written by Shomer Chinam, and therefore, again, no p'tur of Ba'alav Imo by Pshia. If you hold the fun of lefnei fanav, then you could apply Ba'alav Imo even back to Shomer Chinam. If that's the case, then it tells me that the exemption of Ba'alav Imo even applies for negligence. Incredible. How do we paskin? Get ready for it. Here's what I'll say. So the halacha is Ramam Hilchos Sirus Perak Aleph Halacha Gimel Mafkid Eitzach Havero Ben Mechinam Ben Mischar O Ishilo Eskiro Im Shalosh Shomer Sabayim Nedav Shalayim Oschar Nahari Shomer Bata Miklum. So let's listen to this. So now the Rambam just here writes that, by the way, the concept first of all, and this gives it away a little bit, the concept of Ba'alav Imo applies to all relationships, right? So this is very important. So we pass in the fun of the lefnei fanav. So again, the p'tur of Ba'alav Imo applies whether you are a shomer chinam, a shomer sachar, or a shoel, or a socher. We haven't spoken about really a socher, a renter, but it applies to everyone. And therefore, again, afilu pasha bedavar sheshamar va'avad machmas apshia harei ze pater shene'emar in Ba'alav Imo lo yishalim sachu babischa. So both say, we paskin ultimately again. First, so 2 things that come out of here. Number 1, the p'tur of Ba'alav Imo applies to all relationships. Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sachar, Shoel, Sochar. Number 2, Ba'alav Imo is so powerful, I will say that it applies even to negligence. Ultimately, again, that halacha mas, even if I'm a posheya, if the owner of the animal ultimately again is present, halacha l'maisa, again, I am pater. So I will say, just 2 things to mention. First of all, I know that it could be right now you're feeling like I'm not sure. One of 2 things were happening, right? Either Ari accidentally made decaf this morning, right? Or I feel like I just got hit by like a bum Metzia truck. Not sure what's going on. I will say. So remember again, even if your head is swimming a little bit, just take a deep breath and just breathe it in. Just take it in, because I will say sometimes even what the mind doesn't understand, the neshama gets the greatest amount of pleasure from you. I guarantee you one thing: your neshama understands every single word of this sugya. And also, what you don't understand is because of me, because we're going quickly. We're trying to ingest a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. That's why I'm trying to just consolidate it, right? Just into just simple bullet points. So the bullet points here, we'll say that's the bullet points taken from the sugya. But just always remember, because we always have these kinds of days in Daf Yomi, where it's just, again, these are not hard Gemaras. What makes it hard is a lot of information in a very short amount of time. That's what makes it difficult. I will say, but in those moments where like your head is spinning a little bit, just I was saying, the neshama is dancing. The neshama is absolutely dancing, because it can't believe that it has the privilege to sit and just learn a lot of Gemara. The neshama is always dancing. I will say one more piece to remember. I will say, I just want to tell you the critical pieces of this Gemara. Listen, what are we learning about? And this is why this Gemara is going to be the most important Gemara in your entire life. And I'll tell you why. Get ready for this. Now listen, what are we learning about now? The p'tur of Ba'alav Imo. The p'tur of Ba'alav Imo says that when the owner is with the object, so therefore again the borrower is exempt. I will say, why is this the most important Gemara of your life? Because I will say, this is the Gemara that is a little bit of a limud zechus for us after 120. Because after 120, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to say, no, what happened? I gave you a neshama. I gave you abilities. I gave you everything. And why were you posheya? Why were you negligent? Why did you allow the neshama to go missing, to go broken, to all these things to happen to it? And again, I have my answer. Ribono shel olam, you're right, but I'm pater. You know why I'm pater? Ba'al avimo. Because at the end of the day, I was a borrower, a shomer chinam, a shomer sachar, a socher on my neshama. But Ribono shel olam, you are with me every single step of the way. The owner of the object was always with me. And what's the halacha? What's the halacha ultimately again? When it's Ba'al avimo, what's the halacha? Pater. Now again, one shouldn't rely on this argument, right? Lechatchila. But I have to say, as I was preparing the daf last night, I was thinking about this. I said, oh my gosh, it's just a shtickle relief. It's just a little bit of relief. Like, Ribono shel olam, Ba'al avimo, you're with me. I believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with me every single step of my life. There's no moment where I am out of his sight. There's no moment where he is not holding my hand. There is no moment where the owner of this neshama, I'm not the owner of it. Right? This is long-term lease. This is like land in Eretz Yisrael, land in Yerushalayim, right? This is long-term lease. It's not mine. It doesn't belong to me. It's a piece of the Ribono shel olam that he lent to me for 120 years, hopefully in this world. And the incredible moment is every single moment that I have this object, Ba'al avimo. So it is a chatzi nechama that after 120 we have to face the days in Shalmalo. Ultimately, again, there is that Torah of Ba'al avimo. But on the reverse side, one would have to imagine that when you're borrowing an object, like when you borrow something from someone and the owner is there when you're using the object, you're usually much more careful with how you're using it, right? Because you don't want the owner to see you're not handling it gently, you're not taking good care of it. So as much as Ba'al avimo creates a p'tur, Ba'al avimo also creates a heightened sense of responsibility and liability. When I know that the owner of the object is standing right here and he's watching me, as much as, yes, I have certain exemptions, on a personal level, I'm going to be so much more careful about how I handle the object. So maybe I'm pater if something happens, but it also increases my acute awareness for how I'm handling it. So if I am the recipient of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ribono shel olam gave this to me, and it's Ba'al avimo, how careful I have to be with how I'm treating it each and every day, knowing that the owner is right here and watching me in every single moment. Incredible. Let's go back to Amrav Hamnuna. So now we got our first major piece of halacha l'maisa. Amrav Hamnuna. The Olam Uchayiv. So this is now another great case over here. Hamnuna says, the Olam Uchayiv ad shetei para v'choresh ba chamor u'mechamra achareh v'adshu bailem mishas she'ela ad shas shura meisa. Okay, so in the first part of today's Gemara, we're really focusing on what or where does Ba'al avimo apply? Right, and that's what we've established in the first, right? So Shvura, Mesa, Nignava, Avda, even Pshia. Now Rav Hamnuna is getting into the degree in what is the definition of Ba'al avimo. What does it mean that the owner is with me? All right, I'm borrowing the Aksam Ruvain. So now we're saying again, Ba'al avimo, I'm pater from everything. What does it mean that the owner is with us? Rav Hamnuna Rabbi hands down, really, or brings down two concepts. Number one, so number one, Ba'al avimo says, the owner has to be engaged in the same work as the animal. So in other words, if I'm borrowing Ruvain's ox or Ruvain's cow to go out and plow, that means what Ba'al avimo means, I'm also hiring Ruvain to do the plowing as well. In other words, as opposed to what we saw before, where Master told you that to take that previous thing with a little bit of a grain of salt, for as opposed to what we saw before, that it was an opinion that said that Ba'al avimo means that I borrowed the animal and the owner is doing something else. Rav Hamnuna says, no, that's not true. Ba'al avimo means I rented the animal and I hired Ruvain, and Ruvain and the animal are doing the same exact malacha. That's number one. Number two, va'adshi bailim mishas she'ilat shas shvuro meisa. Furthermore, I'm going to say, I have to employ Ruvain, literally again from the moment that I borrowed the animal. In other words, there has to be both hiring of Ruvain and borrowing of the animal simultaneously, and Ruvain has to be in my employ through the event, through the damage. So in other words, if I hired him at the time that I borrowed the animal, but then let's say again a day later he stopped working for me, but I'm still borrowing the animal dies a week later, I'm chayv. That's not Ba'al avimo. Ba'al avimo means I hired Ruvain at the same time that I borrowed the animal, and Ruvain is in my employ through the event that occurred. Okay? That's Rav Hamnuna. We'll see if we pass that. Amma kasavar bailav imo akula milsam mashma. So it says obviously Rav Hamnuna literally says balav imo. What does balav imo mean? Literally balav imo. That the owner is with the animal the entire time. He's hired together with the animal, does the same work as the animal, and is present in my employ through the event, whatever the event is. Lost, stolen, broken, damaged, pshia, whatever it is. Alma kasavar balavima kulam milsamashma. So Massive Rav raised the kasha sha'alav sha'al baile imo. So we said before, I borrowed Ruvain's cow, and I also borrowed Ruvain along with it. Sachra v'sachra baile imo, or I rented the cow and rented Ruvain along with it. Sachra v'sha'al baile imo, or I rented the cow, borrowed Ruvain with it. Sha'alav v'sachra baile imo, or reverse. Afapi sha'bailim osim malacha b'makom acher. So what we quoted before. Even though Ruvain is working for me, but he's doing different kind of work. Whatever, he's working in a different field. He's working a different malacha, umesa, and then the animal dies, pater. So we'll say ultimately again he's pater. So what do you see from here? Is a question of Hamnuna. Where Hamnuna said that the Torah of Balav Imo only applies when Ruvain and his cow have first of all been engaged at the same time and are doing the same malacha. But here you see that if Ruvain is doing a different malacha, it's still called Balav Imo and pater. Ma'ila malacha acheres. Lo ba'osa malacha. No. It means where Reuven and his cow are doing the same malacha. But that's not what it means. That's not what it says. Ve'Allah, my makom acher. What does it mean, the makom acher? The kamarfi va'azul kama. This is interesting. I'll say, what's the case? The case is where the animal is plowing. But I will say, sometimes if the earth is a little bit too hard, you actually have to loosen the soil before the animal begins to plow. So it could be the case we're talking about over here is where Ruvain is walking in front of his animal, loosening the soil a little bit, and then the cow is coming behind him. So the Gemara was calling that before. The Gemara was calling that makom acher. It's calling it a separate place. Why was it calling it a separate place? Because technically speaking, the animal is working on one spot, and Reuven's working on a different spot. But for our purposes, that's still called simultaneity of labor, right? They're doing the same exact thing together. The seifa al gaba. Rabbi said, but since the second part of that Mishnah was talking about where they're working together, Reisha b'malacha hakaras. The Reisha seems to be talking about where they're not working together. Diktani seifa, look at the seifa. Shala v'achagach shal baila. If you rented the animal, but then only later on engage the owner. So the Gemara says, or so we'll say in this case there's no simultaneity of hiring, right? In this particular case over here, I hired the animal before the owner, or the owner before, or really the animal before the owner. Even though at the time of the event, Reuven is working together with his animal. Nevertheless, chayiv. Chayiv, why? Because we'll say why? Because halacha l'maisa, the owner was not hired at the same time as the animal was borrowed. So the Gemara says, Amri, Reisha v'Seifa ba'osa malacha. The truth is, both the Reisha and the Seifa are talking about a case where the owner is working in the same malacha as the animal. So what's going on? What's this? We'll say, the Reisha, Rabusa Kamashmalon, of Seifa, Rabusa Kamashmalon. Both the Reisha and the Seifa are coming to teach us an important halacha. What halacha? The Gemara says, Reisha Rabusa Kamashlan da'af. So what is the Reisha teaching me? The afagav delav al gaba ela ba'osa malacha kevan dahavu bailim b'shas she'ela pater. So I will say the Reisha is coming to teach me that what? That if the owner was engaged at the same time I borrowed the cow, right? Then that's and now they're working together, even though they're not exactly working together, but they're doing the same malacha. So for example. The Ruvain is in front of the cow, breaking up the soil. The cow is behind him. So Ruvain is not actively working with the animal, but we call that osa malacha. But they're engaged in the same labor. That satisfies the criteria. So we'll say, in other words, Balav Ima doesn't need the worker working directly with the animal. It just needs the worker engaged with the same malacha. What does it say they're coming to teach us? Even if the owner is actively working with the animal, if the owner was not engaged at the same time that the animal was borrowed, it's not called Ba'alav Imo. I will say, so again, what you need is simultaneity of engagement. Now we're going to see this. Actually, it doesn't work both ways. Meaning what? Let's say, so in an ideal sense, Ba'alav Imo means like this. At the time that I am borrowing the cow from Ruvain, I also hire Ruvain to work with me. There has to be simultaneity. If I borrow the cow and only later on hire Ruvain, that is not going to satisfy, and then the animal dies, that's not called Ba'alav Imo, even though Ruvain is working with the animal at that time. Now the converse may be true. In other words, if I hire Ruvain first, and then later on also borrow his animal, that may work. That may work. We'll see in just a bit. So the Gemara says, See if you say the Reisha is talking about where they're doing the same malacha, and the Seifa is talking about where they're doing two different malachas. The owner is doing one thing, the cow is doing something separate. Hainu Rabusa. Then Abba said that's the Chiddush. But if you said the Reisha and the Seifa are the same malacha, my Rabusa, then what's the Chiddush? Idi v'idi ba'osa malacha habi. Rather, else you have to say that both are dealing with the same malacha. Votanya. Furthermore, we learn Mimashra shenemar in Ba'alav Imo lo yishalim. Since the pasuk says if the owner is with it, you don't have to pay. There's an exemption. Any odea shem. Sorry. Yeah. Any odea shem Ba'alav any mo shalim yishalim. Don't I know that if the owner is not with the borrower, that the borrower certainly has to pay. Ma TAMLUD Ba'alav ein imo. Why does the pasuk have to explicitly say if the owner is not with the animal, that the borrower does have to pay? Lomer lecha haya imo b'shas she'ela ein tzarich liyos imo b'shas shvura umesa. Wow. Rabbi said to teach me a very important halakha, which is that as long as the owner was present at the time the animal was borrowed, meaning as long as the owner was hired to work for the borrower at the time the borrower borrowed the animal, even if the owner was no longer in the employ of the borrower at the time that the animal broke, died, stolen, lost, there's still a p'tur, still an exemption. But if the owner was just simply there at the time that the animal died or was broken, the owner has to be present at the time, has to be engaged at the time, ultimately, again, that it was borrowed. The other Brisa says, since the pasuk says, if the owner is not there, you have to pay. Don't I know from that if halach l'maisa the owner is there, I'm exempted from paying? Elama tamlomer and Ba'alav Imo. Rabbi says, so therefore, why does the pasuk say Ba'alav Imo? Lomer lecha keva sheyatza samirashus mashil sha'achas b'bailim umeisa pater. That since at the moment that the animal left the domain of the owner and went, literally the lender, and went into the domain of the borrower, that the owner was in the employ of the borrower, and then it died, pater. To which the Gemara says, Tiyufta Rav Hamnuna Tiyufta. So we'll say, okay, so now let's just bring this together. Last 2 minutes we have. Here we go. Remember, here's the flow. What did Rav Hamnuna say? Rav Hamnuna said, there are two things you need in order to go ahead and avail yourself of the exemption of Ba'alav Imo. What are they? Number one, the owner of the animal has to have been engaged at the same time you borrowed the animal. There has to be what we call simultaneity of engagement. That's number one. Number two, Rav Hamnuna said, it's really two things that are three. And along with that simultaneity of engagement must begin from the moment that the animal was borrowed until when? Till the moment of the event, right? The event, whatever the event is. Lost, stolen, broken, died, pshia, whatever it is, right? So there has to be simultaneity of engagement from beginning to end. Number two, owner and animal must be actively engaged in the same exact work. So both say the Gemara has effectively refuted both counts of Rav Hamnuna. So both say, what is the halacha? Here we go. The Rambam will say same halacha. So here is the halacha l'maisa. Here's what you have to take with you. So therefore, again, the Rambam says as follows. But it's kind of like in the middle of Rambam. So he says, "Kisheshal habaylim oschan be'etz shanat la'chefetz, af api she'ena baylim sham imo be'etz agneva va'aveda o be'etz shenenas." So both say, so the halacha is as follows. Good. So the halacha is as follows. The halacha is that what we require is simultaneity of engagement. Meaning what? In order for there to be the Torah of Ba'al Avimo, at the time I borrowed the animal from Ruvain, I also have to go ahead and hire Ruvain to be working for me. In other words, he has to be engaged for me at the same time that I borrow the animal. That engagement has to be simultaneous. Now, what I will say is it's not totally true, because what does that mean? In other words, I could hire Ruvain first and then borrow the animal later. The point is, Ruvain has to be in my employ at the time I borrow the animal. So either that means I hired Ruvain earlier and now borrowing the animal now, or simultaneously I'm going ahead and hiring Ruvain and borrowing the animal. How there could be simultaneity is the next sugya. But again, we'll assume right now there could be simultaneity. We'll say once that happens, that establishes Ba'al Avimo. To the point, listen to this, to the point that even if halacha l'maisa, Ruvain leaves working for me, I don't know, a week later, and I still have the animal, and the animal dies 2 weeks later, I am pater. It's incredible. The Torah of Ba'al Avimo only requires that the owner of the animal was in my employ at the time I borrowed the animal, even if he is no longer in my employ at the time of the actual event. Listen to the words of the Rambam. The Rambam says, "Af al pi she'ena bailim sham." So he says, "Kisheshala bailim osachron be'ez shenat ala chayfetz, af al pi she'en habailim sham imo be'ez hagneva v'ha'aveda o be'ez shene'enas." As long as there was simultaneous engagement, even if what? Even if halacha l'maisa, the owner is no longer in my employ at the time of the event, halacha l'maisa, there is still the Torah of Ba'al Avimo. Now, the interesting part about says also, what about malacha? So we pass also against Rav Hamnuna that the owner of the animal has to be employed by me, but need not be employed in the same malacha. It could even be malacha acheres. So, for example, I borrowed Ruvain's ox to plow. But it happens to be, I'm actually borrowing Ruvain to work, in my hydroponics greenhouse, right? So different malacha, totally different malacha. The Torah of Ba'al Avimo will still apply. So therefore, Rav Huna is effectively refuted on both counts. Number one, well, he's right in that there must be simultaneous engagement. I need to get Ruvain and the animal at the same time. But unlike Rav Hamnuna, who says that the owner has to be in my employ the entire duration up until the event, we reject that. And number two, it doesn't have to be the same malacha. It could even be malacha acheres. Right? I will say, again, we're not finished with these sugis. There's more, but I just wanted to close that so you understand that at least you leave with the halacha l'maisa. We'll further explore it tomorrow. Tremendous start to the week. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Good morning.
Following my 10th grade Rebbe and Shamo's dance spacing out. Could have changed the course of my life.
It's absolutely true.
It's true. I know now that it's true.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But I don't even know. Maybe we were that young, we wouldn't even have appreciated the state.